Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up today, undermining the UK's climate commitments. Criticism after Michael Gove gives the go-ahead to the first new coal mine for 30 years.
The proposed development itself would have an overall neutral effect on climate change, and as such there would be no material conflict with government policies for meeting the challenge of climate change.
Also ahead, how wood burners can be up to 4,000 times more polluting than gas central heating. And fears grow over whether the nations involved in the COP15 Biodiversity Summit will be able to agree a pact to protect nature for this decade. Hi, welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and investigate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. Now, after 2 years of toing and froing, the government last night gave the green light to a new coal mine in Whitehaven in Cumbria. But campaigners insist there is nothing green about it at all and question how the commitment to net zero can in any way be compatible with building the first coal mine in the UK for 30 years. The government argues that, if anything, the country's carbon footprint will be reduced as the coking coal, which will be used for the steelmaking industry, will replace coal that would otherwise have to be imported. Our science editor, Tom Clark, reports.
This former industrial site is about to become home to the UK's first new coal mine in 30 years. The proposed Woodhouse colliery aims to produce coal for the steel industry from a seam extending from this protected Cumbria coastline far out under the Irish Sea. The local council couldn't be happier.
We've waited a long time for it. The community have waited a long time to it, so we believe it's the right decision, it's the right thing for us here. The hard work that's gone in from our community in supporting this, our local council, that's all now been recognised, and I'm delighted that the government have now supported this decision.
West Cumbria Mining, the Australian-backed company behind it, promises 500 local jobs. But what of the global impact of the 3 million tonnes of coal each year they will produce? The government's perfectly logical view is that because our steelmakers currently import coking coal and will continue to do so, the impact of a local mine on climate would be neutral or even beneficial.
If you follow the logic of this decision through, it either means that this coal mine will only operate for a limited amount of time because our steel industry has to reach net zero by about 2035, according to the government's advisors, or that the government's prepared to pass on its carbon-cutting obligations to future governments and future generations.
Local campaigners are in disbelief.
They've heard all the evidence, they've seen the results for themselves, they've been and seen the communities that have been flooded out as a result already of global warming, and they're going ahead with the coal mine. It's just, yeah, really, really upset and really disappointed.
What does it also say about our international rhetoric on climate?
It's a terrible decision. It's a terrible decision for our energy policy, for our climate policy, and it won't provide the jobs that people in Cumbria need. They've come up with a solution which is going to make a mockery of us internationally, which senior Conservatives have said is the wrong decision. It's a government that is out of ideas and that is stuck in the past.
The last mine in this town closed in 1986, and now a new coal era begins, but in a world that's more than half a degree warmer than it was then, and getting warmer all the time. Tom Clark, Sky News, Whitehaven.
Well, the man who gave the go-ahead for the new mine is the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Secretary Michael Gove. He has been defending his decision today.
The applicant is making it clear that this will be the only net zero metallurgical coking coal mine in the world. And it is vitally important that all of us recognise, as the inspector does on page 255, that the proposed development would to some extent support the transition to a low-carbon future, specifically as a consequence of the provision of a currently needed resource from a mine that aspires to be net zero. I think it is also important that we recognise that in any change of land use, there will always be a potential impact on biodiversity and on the local environment as well. And again, it is important to note that the inspector on page 278 of his report makes it clear that this mine would not cause any unacceptable impacts on ecology nor result in a net loss in biodiversity. And the inspector also makes clear in paragraph 22.9 that the proposed development itself would have an overall neutral effect on climate change, and as such there would be no material conflict with government policies for meeting the challenge of climate change.
A report from England's Chief Medical Officer has found that eco-designed wood-burning stoves produce 450 times more toxic air pollution than gas central heating. And Sir Chris Whitty's report found that older heaters, now banned from sale, produce nearly 4,000 times more air pollution, while electric heating produces none. Professor Whitty's report also calls on people to have the courage to tell motorists to stop idling engines as part of efforts to tackle pollution. Air pollution was chosen by Sir Chris as the focus of his 2022 annual report. He said there has been progress in tackling outdoor air pollution over the years, and that is set to continue. But outdoor air pollution still leads to between 26,000 and 38,000 deaths a year in England alone. Rising temperatures driven by climate breakdown are causing distress to the fetuses of pregnant farmers. A study revealed the fetuses of women working in fields in the Gambia showed concerning rises in heart rates and reductions in the blood flow to the placenta as conditions became hotter. There's already strong evidence that extreme heat leads to increases in stillbirths, premature births and low birth weights in rich, temperate countries. The new study focuses on farmers in a tropical country where increasing extreme heat is a serious concern. In Montreal, where the COP15 Biodiversity Summit is currently taking place, fears are said to be growing over whether the 190 countries involved could agree on an ambitious global pact to protect nature this decade. The formal negotiations have now begun, but extra talks before the opening of the summit failed to streamline the draft biodiversity targets. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged the participating nations to resolve their differences.
Climate action and protection of biodiversity are two sides of the same coin. And we need tough regulatory frameworks and disclosure measures that end greenwashing and hold the private sector accountable. And we need developed countries to provide meaningful financial support for the countries of the Global South as custodians of the world's natural wealth following centuries of exploitation and loss.
Well, now, Eva Zabe, the Executive Director of Business for Nature, is heading to the summit tomorrow and joins us now from Geneva. Thank you for your time today. All this is really a trade-off, isn't it, being considered between people and conservation. Which is winning?
Well, it shouldn't be a trade-off at all. In fact, none of us can live without all of the natural resources that our precious planet provides. So, you know, thriving economies and healthy societies, thriving businesses, all fundamentally rely on nature. And so that's why this conference is so important. The UN climate COPs is something that we're familiar with. Now what's happening in Montreal, as you just said, all of these governments coming together to negotiate and hopefully adopt what's called the Global Biodiversity Framework as part of the sister Biodiversity COP. And just like the Paris Agreement on climate, we now need an ambitious global biodiversity framework. And the reason that I'm saying that is because businesses need the political certainty to then scale and speed up action. And if we're really honest about it, unfortunately, the voluntary actions are just not enough to address the scale of nature loss we're seeing. And that has impacts on people, of course, which should be central to these decisions. I should say then that because the voluntary actions are not enough, what's happening now is that more than 330 companies and financial institutions from 52 countries are calling for mandatory requirements for all large businesses and financial institutions to both assess and disclose their impacts and dependencies on nature. So that's a key element for us in that global biodiversity framework. Because without this information, yeah, sorry, I'm digging right in there.
Yeah, they're really going to get involved in these businesses then?
They are, and we've actually seen tremendous momentum like never before. It's really unprecedented. Hundreds of companies now finally seeing nature on their business agenda alongside the political one. Now, all of these political decisions and frameworks only are impactful if they lead to action, and we can only take meaningful action if we have the information. So right now, we don't even have the information. When we say we, it's even governments, consumers, businesses, investors don't have the right information of the impacts and dependencies that lead to risks and opportunities for all of us. And so that's why we're essentially flying blind, and it's completely normal to require businesses to report on their financial performance. We now need there to be mandatory requirements to report on natural, social, and human capital too.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic are you that this summit can achieve anything? Previous commitments have really not been met, have they?
That's an absolutely fair point. Really tricky question, because a lot of the discussions are actually quite up in the air right now. There are some positive signs of discussions moving forward, but again, it's a bit too early to say. I remain optimistic that there will be an agreement. Especially, I think what's needed now is that high-level political leadership coming in. And so there are over 100 ministers that are planning to come to COP15 next week. That needs to unblock some of the negotiations on the ground. But regardless of an agreement, I would just add, I think that the momentum that the COP15 has provided as a hook for realizing, yes, we need that high policy ambition at a global level that will then be implemented at a national level and will set the bar. That bar needs to be set high to level the playing field for all companies. And essentially, the message that we're going in with hundreds of companies that are ready for the change is business as usual is no longer an option, and we need large-scale action. That can only happen if all elements of this systems transformation are in place. So businesses don't operate in isolation. They operate within multiple systems that we all, as individuals, are part of, with how we spend our time, our money, and who we vote for example.
All right, well, we'll see what happens, won't we? Eva Zabe, great to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And that is it from us today. Just a reminder, though, you can watch Tom Heap's Climate Show on Saturdays and Sundays at 3:30 in the afternoon and again at 7:30 in the evening. And if you have questions about climate change that you want answered, then send them all to us using this QR code, and we will try to answer as many as we can on Tom's show. But that's it for now. And from me, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.